musical chairs.
Were everybody good? All right, good. I'm Andy Kahan. Thank everybody for being here. I'm Andy Kahan, Director of Victim Services, Crime Stoppers of Houston. You know, when we all woke up this morning and we saw what was happening with the FBI arresting people, there was a few of us that had an inkling what was going on, and our intuition was spot on. But there's people and victims that have directly been impacted by what's going on with allowing people to be fraudulently released on bail. And I'm going to ask April to talk about her experiences in her family and also as an advocate for other victims' families as well.
Thank you, Andy. My name is April Aguirre. I am here today not by choice, but because we were pushed into this criminal justice system. When 9-year-old Arlene Alvarez was shot in the head, we didn't understand the system. And even worse, insult to injury, when the individual who shot her was out on bail so fast, we started scrambling, trying to take a crash course on how this was working. We began testifying at the bail bond board against this company because we found a pattern that multiple violent offenders, multiple victims were dealing with these same companies. And I don't know about y'all, but I know that we didn't have that kind of money sitting around. So we knew that there was some kind of fraudulent activity going on, but we couldn't prove it. When the first FBI raid happened, we were ecstatic because these companies were making Houston a less safe place to live. They were taking bonds that other companies wouldn't take, and they were taking risks, but we couldn't prove how. So as a community, we came together alongside Paul Castro, Andy, and Adrian Garcia, and we passed a 10% minimum mandate to try to control these violent offenders from coming out. And I said violent offenders. That means the worst of the worst. Murderers, people that commit sexual assault, people that commit aggravated robbery. We wanted to make sure that these people were not coming out on a discounted bail like they were. And it worked, but not as well as we wanted to. Murderers were still getting out on discounted bonds. So we started making complaints when the bail bond board and to our federal partners, asking for help. We didn't know what we were dealing with, and we could have never imagined how large this is. But I can say one thing. We need to stop making money off of dead children, and we need to stop making money off of homicide victims. This should not be a lucrative business. It's sick. It's not enough that you bail people out, but you do it unethically. We want people to follow the rules and the laws. If you can bond out ethically, do it. But companies making a living like this, and it's dozens of people, when we could have never imagined how large it was. And I hope that today, after what our federal partners did, that Houston is a safer place to live. If you commit a crime here in Harris County, if you harm our children, if you kill one of our family members, it shouldn't be easy for you to get out of jail. You should face consequences that match your crime. When we started with this, we started with the phrase, no more bogus bonds. And we want to continue that because we focus on violent offenders that harm our community. And people need to stop making money off of dead people and dead children. And this company bailed out our murderer. And they made money off of Arlene's death. And that was the worst mistake you could have ever done because you kicked us when we were down. And you opened our eyes to a company that we didn't even know about. And we're not going anywhere. And for all victims, I want you to know that you have a voice. You have a voice and use it. And if they don't listen, scream louder. Because this is unacceptable, and I'm just so grateful. Today's a great day, and it's a win for Houston. Thank you to the FBI and everybody else that participated. We are so grateful for your hard work and dedication to making our communities safer. And Arlene, rest in peace, baby, and you're making a big difference. Thank you.
My name is Mario Garza. I'm president of the Professional Bondsmen of Harris County Association. As I've gotten to know victims, the criminal justice system used to be about a partnership between bondsmen and the judges that you all elect. Judges used to take that discretion seriously. What we have is what's morphed out of a soft on crime criminal justice system that's allowed a company like this to do what they've done. Everything is unchecked. It's unprecedented for what the allegations are. Every industry has bad apples. That is less than 1%, but that does not take away from the damage that is done once we get into the details of these allegations and the violent criminals that were released back into the public on basically no paperwork, because that paperwork was fraudulent. So that partnership that used to exist where a judge knew to hold somebody in jail when they were violent are now being released out on these reduced payments, whatever it is. I am myself a bondsman, and what I've learned about these allegations is I can't believe it, but I do. I'm not saying that I don't. What I'm saying is that as I get to look, when you have to look victims in the eyes, you have to ask yourself what you're going to be about. So before I'm a bondsman, I'm a person. I live here in Harris County. I was born here in Houston, Texas. This place matters to me. And if you go back 8 years ago, we were not this unsafe. We had safety because we had a partnership with everybody. Bondsmen did what they were supposed to do. When somebody didn't go to court, we looked for them. We have people in my industry that I had to call out, and I take no joy in doing that when I did that. But I did it because it's a matter of right and wrong. And there are victims. You're absolutely right. Arlene, there's several names that we could list here, and yet this went unchecked. It took the federal FBI to come in here and fix what Harris County should have did itself. So if that tells you anything, that tells you that we got leaders here that allowed it to fester and grow. And it did. I mean, it's like anything in life. It goes unchecked. What's it going to do? It's going to get worse. And that's what it did by nature. Criminals are no different than anybody else. They have a natural habit for what they do. And when it's unchecked, whether it's misdemeanors or felonies, they all repeat offend. So I'm here out of obligation as being a human being. I haven't had to lose anybody, but I certainly don't want to wait till that kind of criminal justice reform lands on my doorstep or your doorstep. I don't want to wait that long, which is why we have to partner with people like victims and victims services to be here. I'm not ashamed of what I do because I did it correctly. I was holding people accountable who were out of my bonds, but it's out of our hands. It's left up to the people that you elect who are just looking the other way, that the FBI had to come in and do what they did. So thank you for hearing me out.
You know, one thing that today's right, and first, you know, on behalf of Crime Stoppers, thank our law enforcement partners, whether it be Houston Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, the U.S. Marshals, FBI, the Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's Office. I mean, God bless them for recognizing that this was a problem and an issue. And we knew this 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the three of us, along with Paul Castro and several other members of Parents and Murdered Children, appeared before Commissioner's Court. And we also appeared with Senator Whitmire, at that time, who was the Dean of the Criminal Justice, who's now the mayor. So Senator Whitmire, now Mayor Whitmire, also championed and helped us get the 10% because we were stunned. And I remember talking to Paul Castro, basically stating he couldn't believe that the person that murdered his son got out on basically, you know, a 2% bond. And that kind of opened the door for everything. If this was happening in his case, how many others was it happening? And that kind of led us to where we are today. The question that we have, of course, is who benefited from being released on fraudulent bonds? Who are the offenders? What are their backgrounds? What are their criminal histories? How far back does this go? How many of them have reoffended after being released on bond that they quite frankly shouldn't have been released to begin with the exception of partnering with organizations and a few bail bonds companies to get them out the door? How many people perhaps became victimized by offenders who under normal business circumstances wouldn't be out to victimize people? these are questions that we have, and I think people of Harris County should also have as well. And that's something I hope that we will eventually get answers on, because I would love to know what the offenders who have been released, where they are any of them fugitives, any of them committed violent crimes? These are the questions that we have to ask, and we really need answers. So as April said, today's a good day, yet at the same time, it opens up the proverbial Pandora's box. And from a public safety perspective, I can't fathom how this could have gone on for so long. And thankfully, somebody has finally put an end for this. And the other question, of course, is this solely for Harris County? These companies, I'm assuming, and I don't like to speculate, but I can't imagine that they solely practice in Harris County. I would certainly make the assumption, again, it's assumption, but I'm sure this has happened in other counties as well. Probably happened throughout the state. So yes, this is Harris County, but I'm thinking this is actually more of a statewide issue right now. So like I said, I'm glad that we were finally able to do something about it. It's been a long 2-year battle. So thank you to April, Mario, Paul, and Senator Whitmire, now Mayor Whitmire, and the box has now been opened, and we're going to be chasing the ghosts, and the ghosts are going to be found, and we're going to determine whether the ghosts have harmed other individuals as well. Because if I'm a victim and I find out that somebody was released on fraudulent bail bond and I lost a family member, or I was robbed, or I was kidnapped, or I was sexually assaulted by someone that shouldn't have been released, yeah, there's going to be hell to pay. So at this time, we'll open it up for any questions or.
I know you said there's going to be hell to pay. Who do you think should pay for this?
I can answer that question. So when, as a business, you choose to act in a fraudulent manner, you are taking on a civil liability. I urge victims, if you were a victim of a loved one that was hurt, killed, victimized by an individual that was out by one of these companies, you may have a case, and you should probably get a lawyer, because the only way that these people learn their lesson is when you hit them in their pocketbooks. Sue them. Start a legal process against these companies. They acted in a fraudulent manner, and they caused you harm. Go after them.
Mario, can you kind of elaborate on some of the company's history with the bond board in Harris County and the licensing issues that had come up in the past? Is that something?
Prior to the FBI raid, they hadn't had any real problems. They kind of were rubber stamped, I guess, through the licensing. Things didn't really start to take hold or some interest when it was brought to the Commissioner's Court's attention when they were dealing with the 10%. That's kind of what caused all this. See, bondsmen, for the most part, were doing close to 10%. But as bail reform took hold, slim pickings obviously caused there to be less and less to pick from. So these companies that, as I say, had a rob Peter to pay Paul business model started to ramp up bonding out people who shouldn't have been bonded. But that's kind of a shared responsibility, meaning that with the violent histories that, as Andy has seen and has kept track of, some of these people should not have had bonds at all.
And do you have any context on other bonding companies possibly not accepting the risk of some of the defendants that this bonding company was when they were giving them those bonds? Absolutely.
I was one of them, because sometimes I would get the call before I would look it up again and notice that the bond was made through the Maharibs. I turned it down because it was a bad bond. The co-signers didn't work, had no real residency. Combined co-signers together couldn't possibly pay a $100,000 judgment if the bond were to go bad and the bondsman were to run away. Just as a matter of rule, most of us bondsmen prefer family members. Some of these people were not family members. They were like a person that said, maybe I knew them a year. or for 6 months, or I'm the person's girlfriend and I just met them, 6 months ago. These are not strong co-signers. The higher the bond, the stronger the co-signer. So yes, very many bonding companies would turn them down, and then they would find their way to that company that, as a matter of fact, the kind of calls I was getting around that time were, do you accept 3%? Do you accept 3%? And I'm like, I almost laughed on the phone like, no, I don't. So obviously somebody was offering it because they were calling around. And I would get that call, and it was more and more frequent that I knew somebody's out there doing it. And so that's where I felt like it took hold. But for the most part, 95% of us were doing it close to 10%, maybe 8% down, and we were doing the bonds. But again, this was all supported by strong co-signers. When you don't have that, it's just a waste to take any money.
You had expressed concern prior about these companies. You had brought it up out in public. Talk about that. Like, you had voiced it.
Right. And the reason why I did that was, again, why I'm here now, out of obligation. You know right from wrong. You know what you're seeing, you know what you're hearing. And if 95% of us are doing it right, I'm not going to go down with the 6 bonding companies that are bringing shame upon the rest of us. Mm-hmm. And that's why I decided to voice what I needed to voice. Unfortunately, it's played out to be true. I was ahead of it, not because I wanted to be. I didn't know that this was going to culminate to where we are today. Unfortunately, it has. That's why I said it's no joy for me to be here. But if I had to honestly say right from wrong, I chose what was right in the face of money. Because every business, you have to have that. You have to have a moral compass. I'm not against people making money, but why do you have to sell your soul? Why do you have to kill everything behind it? Not everybody operates with that sense of compass, but I do.
What do you think the tangible solutions are? Is it more oversight? I mean, what do you think? What steps can we take to make sure that this doesn't continue?
Okay, well, if you think back 8 to 10 years ago, we were safe here. We didn't have this problem. Why? Because we had a bail schedule, number one. Judges used discretion. They didn't come out on TV and tell you their hands were tied, which is not true, by the way. If you've all read the opinions by now, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, the one out of the Daves case out of Dallas, that is not true at all. Defendants do not have a right to be free from a wealth-based detention. They do not have a right to affordable bail. The only thing they have a right to is a 48-hour hearing to plead their indigency, and a judge is supposed to use discretion based on their criminal history to set bail. And as Harris County before, when you got in trouble, your bail went up higher and higher. And there were no PR bonds. Your bond went up as you got in more trouble. You graduated to felonies, it went up higher. And there were no PR bonds. A bondsman you had to call a bonding company. And that's the way it worked. And when a judge would call a bondsman and say, hey, your guy's not showing up to court, we would find him. And we would either have him in court or placed back in custody. That is the partnership that I was talking about. Now these judges scapegoat us, but they're the ones with the discretion. They're the ones that set bail and can actually deny it and say, hey, you're a violent offender. I zero bond you. We used to see that all the time.
Mario, it's really not, I don't see how it's a judge issue, because basically you've got, according to the indictment, one bonding company that they were basically using phony documents saying that, oh yeah, she's got the money, she can,
Sure.
she's got the collateral, and it wasn't true. I don't understand where the judge is going.
Well, you're correct. That's fraud. That's fraud. You should never do that on any paperwork in any business. I mean, the responsibility.
I don't even know that a judge knew,
right?
I mean,
No,
it's pretty much contained to the bail bonding company, the defendant, and the people that are pulling off the scheme, right?
Right. And that comes from your board, your bail bond board, enforcement. As April has witnessed, there have been people that were brought before the board that what they were doing was pretty egregious, and yet no action was taken. Well, I sit on that board, and even at times I wonder, well, where's the teeth in what I do? Where's the enforcement? Which is why I said it took the FBI to come down and enforce what Harris County should have done itself. When you get complaints about that, and there were numerous, and yet they didn't always go anywhere. And this has been years. I've heard those complaints. People have called me and got my cell phone and said, this is what they're doing. And these are like 7 or 8 people that don't know each other, but they all got the same MO down, right? So I'm listening and I'm going, they're not lying because they don't know each other. So they're obviously telling the truth. And sometimes when those complaints would get back to where they needed to, nothing was done. So I look at that as, I'm just one person on the board. So where's the enforcement?
Where did those complaints need to go that they were not then addressed?
Well, most people have to file their complaints with the Harris County Bail Bond Board or the bonding division with the Sheriff's Department. There's a website. You can go on there and the complaint form's right online. And at times I directed people to that. I would send them that complaint and they could fill it out. Now, where it went after that, I don't know because it never got brought before the board.
So it was reported to the sheriff's office?
Yes. Now, whether they investigated, now they could have investigated, as oftentimes happens. They investigate and they find there's no wrongdoing.
In this case, wasn't it casualty insurance that basically checked a defendant to see, okay, we're going to see if this person, if all this stuff is true, and they found out it wasn't?
What I believe, because my insurance company doesn't do it always, is I don't think information is not verified. The application is submitted and it's taken as is. If I tell you that I got 3 co-signers and one works at, Hobby Lobby for 10 years, another guy works at a bank for 12 years, and I show you their driver's licenses and their check stubs, then that goes on to support what I want to do with that bond. It's on an honor system, basically. But because most of us do tell the truth, we don't want a bad bond. It's in our interest not to have a bad bond. So the insurance company is my partner. I want to do a good bond because I don't want to have to answer to them when it goes bad and they're going, what's going on? Now, I don't write for financial casualty, so I don't know their internal criteria. But I know that you have to, most of them have an approval process over a certain amount. If I have a bond that's too big and I want to write it, I have to call them and say, look, this is what I want to write, but I have these co-signers. Can you check them out as far as here's who I have, here's what I'm doing. You give me the go-ahead or you don't. Most of the time they will because I know what they expect. Other times they'll say, no, we want collateral on this one. And they're generally certain types of cases. For instance, sex cases. They tend to believe that, they feel that those kind of people will abscond a lot easier and sooner, so they want some type of security to back it. To answer your question, Randy, I'm sorry if it seems that I'm blaming judges. No, if what's being alleged is true, then they deserve every bit of that punishment that comes.
Because there's not a process. With what was going on, the judge isn't even involved.
Sure.
Right?
But what I will say is that what it does concern me about what this particular bonding company is alleged to have done is the violent offenders that were unleashed on us out of their specific company. That's disturbing, that concerns me, and what those defendants contributed to the crime problem that we already have in Harris County. So yes, if they were doing that and people lost their lives, which I'm sure someone did, I'm willing to bet money on that, then they deserve everything they're going to get.
So there are 11 Harris County defendants who have been identified as the people who benefited from these fraudulent bonds. Based on your knowledge and context of the company, do you believe there are more than 11?
As long as it's been going on, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know that, if you get a hold of the discovery in the federal matter, they obviously hauled files out of there. And it wasn't 11 because there were boxes. So what would that tell you? There's got to be more. I don't say that to be arrogant. I say that as a matter of how many years it was going on. Surely you're going to have more than 11. But that's probably what they used to build their case.
Do you know how long they operated in Harris County?
I want to say about 8 years, possibly, when they first got their license.
Did she pronounce it A-Able or Able? The company?
Able.
A-Able.
Yes. And
And that's the only bonding company that's part of this indictment right now, correct?
that's
That's the only bonding company. You all were mentioning other companies. The only company listed in the indictment is.
as far as I know, yes, yes. But they're a family. There's a brother, a sister, and then obviously, Sheba's the sister, and then a brother. So there's 3 of them, and they all had the same last name, and they operated different bonding companies, 3 of them.
But she was the only one indicted.
Correct. She was the one that her office was raided.
Right.
So the brothers have 2 different companies?
They did. They're all out of business now. The bail bond board did take action. As a matter of fact, the sureties are who pulled out on them. As the heat grew behind Sheba's raid, the surety companies came to the boards and started withdrawing their licenses and revoking them, or actually voluntarily surrendering the license. Is what.
When did Able disband?
Shortly after the raid, so possibly 3 months after, before the end of the year, I believe. So it was in 22. She was out of business in November, maybe October, November, something like that.
If they were issuing these bad bonds, how were they making their money?
Well, again, my speculation to that is the robbing Peter to pay Paul scenario. We're taking it in all day long, and we're paying out what we have. The judgments themselves, when the bonds go bad, the judgments are not instant. They're months. So in that time, you have months to bring in more money, and then obviously when you pay the judgments, it's time to pay.
They're also releasing people who, under ordinary circumstances, based on the standard bail practices, wouldn't have been able to make a bond unless they cut corners. So by cutting corners, that particular bail bond company is then able to secure a profit that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Well, by the indictment, if I understood it correctly, they basically are charging these defendants who come in, they're charging them for a package that's not even real, that's got all this phony information.
Well, what they're basically doing is they're charging them to get them through the process.
Right.
To say, we'll tell you we'll school you on how to fill out your app and what to put so we can pass it through. And probably charging them more for that. Like, you know what, you wouldn't get a bond anywhere with this information. So we're going to help you, but we're also going to charge you for that. Yeah. So there's a profit to be made, especially when Andy keeps track of all the forfeitures that some of these people, which if you go digging in those cases, you're going to see people who have absconded numerous times, and they're going to charge you for that as well. We're going to have to charge you because you also missed court, but we'll get you through it.
I'm going to close with one comment. I think the days of the honor code amongst the bail bond industry, I think that day is pretty much over and done with. And the only question is, how do we make sure that the bonds that offenders are getting out are legitimate? So I think that's going to be forthcoming down the road. So I'd like to thank everybody for being here. Thank you for coming at short notice. Thank you.
Do you think that has to be at a state level or at a county level?
Can I say something about that? Just so y'all know, with the 10% rule, because we're not being on the honor system anymore, we have to fill out an affidavit every time we turn in a bond, saying that and that's sworn, obviously, saying that we accepted 10%. So we are doing that on every bond of those 17 cases that are designated at 10%.
There was a bill filed last legislative session, House Bill 227, by State Representative Ann Johnson, that would have taken the 10% rule that we have by policy in Harris County and made it statewide. For whatever reason, it didn't get any traction, but something tells me as of today, it will more than likely get refiled again, and perhaps this situation can be a catalyst for change.
Would you like something in Spanish?
Yes.
Okay. Yo me llamo Abril Aguirre. Yo estoy aquí porque Arlene Álvarez recibió un balazo en su cabeza cuando ella solamente tenía 9 años. Y eso completamente destruyó a Wendy, a Armando y a toda la familia. Entonces nosotros, en ese shock de lo que había pasado, empezamos a darnos cuenta que había muchos problemas en nuestro sistema criminal. Y luego, más horroroso fue que la persona que le dio ese balazo salió de la cárcel en un día y no nos entendíamos cómo podía ser posible. Con esa información nosotros empezamos a investigar lo que estaba pasando porque no teníamos el conocimiento. Nos dimos cuenta que esta compañía, que ahora, gracias a Dios, el FBI la está investigando y hoy hubo cargos. Ellos, como nosotros sospechábamos, estaban haciendo cosas que eran ilegales y estaban ganando ganancia y dinero de la gente asesinada, especialmente con nuestra familia de niños, y eso es imperdonable. Yo no sé cómo pueden dormir en la noche, pero nuestros políticos aquí no hicieron nada. Tuvo que venir el FBI y todos los federales tuvieron que entrar para dar justicia a esta gente que hace mucho debería haber sido cerrado este negocio. Pero le damos muchas gracias al FBI y quiero decirle a las víctimas que por favor no se cierren. Si ustedes sienten injusticias, díganlo, háblenlo, porque en nuestros hogares nada cambia. Tenemos que salir y tenemos que decir lo que no está bien. Y lo que hizo esa compañía fue horrible. No sé cómo pueden hacer ganancia de la gente asesinada, de la gente herida, de la gente que han sido víctimas, pero lo hicieron y de maneras ilegales. Pero muchas gracias a todos por haber llegado a este día que se ha tardado mucho para llegar. Hace 2 años es cuando empezamos a pelear contra esta familia que parece como una mafia, pero sin miedo los peleamos. Y doy muchas gracias a Dios por todos que nos ayudaron. Castro,